Broadcasting from Salisbury University campus, this is WSDL Ocean City, NPR News Talk 90.7. Putting Delmarva first. Stay tuned for Delmarva Today with your host, Don Rush.
More than 350 artists are expected to take part in the National Folk Festival. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. The festival will take place in Salisbury from September 7th through the 9th. It will feature many musical acts celebrating the nation's traditions. This morning we'll take a look at some of those artists who will be making an appearance at the festival. With us in studio is Caroline O'Hare. She's a local manager of the festival. And on the phone with us is Blaine Wade. He's a programming manager for the National Council for the Traditional Arts. And welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Don.
So, Caroline, I want to turn to you just briefly. We have a sort of a contest of sorts with the high schools and raising money. Tell us a little bit about that.
We do. At our kickoff in February, Randy Day had this great idea to gather the school spirit of our local high schools and sort of pit each other in a friendly competition against with alumni. So he went up there and said, I want to see who can raise the most. He said, I'm from Bennett. Now I just want to know who's coming in second. And that that started some fires. So we have 4 reps. We have Dick Morris from Bennett High School, Michelle Wright from Mardella, Stephanie Willie from Parkside, and Mike Dunn will be covering Y High, and they are looking to their fellow classmates and to other alums to come together and help raise money to make this festival an incredible success. We are hoping to have 2 prizes. It may fall to 1 depending on what happens, but the first being the most money raised, and then the second being highest participation. We are excited for this because when people have their school's reputation on the line, they really get into the spirit of it. And again, this is all about community building and bringing us together. So it's a fun, friendly competition. It's also incredibly helpful and will help bring over 350 artists to downtown Salisbury. So we're all in. So very excited about it.
So and we'll see who wins.
We'll see who wins, and you can find out more if you go to nationalfolkfestival.com, and it's under High School Challenge. So if you look at nationalfolkfestival.com/HSC, you'll find out more information, and you can also reach out to your respective schools' team leaders.
So now I want to turn to some of the acts that have been announced recently. And I want to turn first to klezmer music, which is apparently celebrated by Michael Winograd and the Honorable, I believe it's Mitch, from Brooklyn. And he's apparently a premier klezmer clarinetist. Let's hear a little bit about that, and we'll come back and talk about it. So, Blaine, tell us a little bit about the origin of klezmer music. Most people are not aware of it.
Sure, I'd love to. I think, what's so great about klezmer music comes across really, really wonderfully in that track is it is celebratory, joyous music. It is the social, secular music that is played and enjoyed throughout the Jewish communities and the Jewish diaspora. And that is so much about coming together for community celebrations and events like that, and it conveys that spirit and that energy. It's music that's roots go way back into the Middle Ages, and it's drawing on influences from cantorial melody, ancient folk tunes, Yiddish poetry, Hebraic ritual, and even Greek and Ottoman influences. And this wonderful stew came together by the late 1800s, and that's when the music really emerged and took hold as the music that you went out and heard at these community celebrations and these secular events. Where the community came together. Now, the music came to the United States in the early 1900s with a large wave of Jewish immigration that came here then. And what the attendees to the National Folk Festival are going to get to experience with Michael Winograd and the Honorable Mention, this wonderful group, are some of the performers who are really carrying this tradition forward into the 21st century. There was a great revival of klezmer in the 1970s. And really breathed new life into the music. And so many of these artists, especially Michael Winograd, as well as the folks who will be with him, are central in leading this revival in a subsequent generation on into the 21st century and keeping the tradition strong and passing it along.
And now I'll turn to a much different kind of music, the blues. Let's hear a little bit about that with Phil Wiggins and the Blues House Party. So, Blaine, this has been described as Piedmont blues music. What distinguishes that, and including dance, I guess it is as well?
Sure. So when we're talking traditional music, there's so much within that sort of body. But within one of those traditions, such as blues, it encompasses such a wide variety of music. Delta blues, Chicago blues, Texas blues. But one of the most well-known, and that's really pertinent to the region here in Maryland, where the festival will be, is the tradition of Piedmont blues. And when we talk about Piedmont blues, that's the region that stretches all the way from Georgia up to the Chesapeake and into the Tidewater region. And it's really one of the oldest forms of the blues. It draws heavily on the fiddle and banjo string band music that was so prominent in this region going back several centuries. And especially the finger-picking guitar style that was prominent in the region. That's very much reflected in the Piedmont blues tradition. And this was music that was originally heard and enjoyed at community settings, country parties, hoedowns, square dances, where dance was central. Now this is music that's largely heard in concert settings, and if people aren't seated, maybe they're standing. But dance has kind of become separated from the musical tradition. And what this particular group, Phil Wiggins Blues House Party, is doing is trying to bring the dance back into it and reconnect the music with the dance element. And this is a group that's led by Phil Wiggins, who is a true Maryland treasure and a national treasure as one of the most accomplished and legendary blues harmonica players out there today. And in this group, he's joined by another wonderful artist, Junius Brickhouse, who is a dance virtuoso. Both are celebrated Maryland artists who've received support from the Maryland State Arts Council. And Phil has been recognized most recently in 2017 with a NEA, a National Heritage Award from the National Endowment for the Arts, which is the highest honor that a folk and traditional artist can receive. Phil grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, now lives in Tacoma Park, Maryland, and he's learned from many of the masters, Archie Edwards, John Jackson, and then for years, decades, over 3 decades, he played with Cephas and Wiggins, or John Cephas in the duo Cephas and Wiggins, which was really one of the premier Piedmont blues ensembles. And now this is a wonderful project where he's teamed up with Junius, who's done a lot of work in dance and dance traditions, but grew up originally in the Virginia Beach area, going to house parties and country blues community settings. And his formative years were really he experienced growing up around this dance tradition. And so he's teamed up with Phil to really try to bring this tradition, this dance element, back to the fore in the music. And he's been learning from dance masters like John D. Holman, and it's just a really fabulous four-piece that's rounded out with Rick Franklin on guitar, a really prominent Piedmont blues guitarist today, and blues fiddler Marcus Moore from Alabama.
And now I want to turn to. It's called. It's been described anyway as Inuit throat singing. I'm not sure exactly what it's going to sound like, but let's go ahead and hear a little bit of it, and we're going to get back to you. So it's been described as a combination of rhythmic melodies and imitation of bird sounds. Tell us a little about the group and this particular form.
Sure, and I'm sure and now that your listeners have heard that really sort of evocative sample of the tradition, I think it's this is going to be something that festival audiences is very new to them. It's a rarely heard tradition outside of Inuit communities. I mean, it's been getting more and more attention, and people have heard it more, but it's still very, very much one of those traditions that we love to bring to the festival, in that it's really been seldom experienced by our audiences, and it's very much in line with what we're trying to do in terms of spreading cultural awareness and cultural appreciation. And we're very excited to bring this tradition to the folks who are going to be coming to Salisbury for the festival. And what Inuit throat singing is, it's a form of entertainment that was emerges out of family settings in Inuit communities in Canada. And when the men would go out and hunt and be away from home, women and children would entertain themselves by playing this game. And as you referenced a second ago, the sounds they're making are imitations of sounds of nature. They can be a bird, a mosquito, or a river, anything from the natural world surrounding them that they're trying to depict through the human voice. And the participants stand very close to each other and combine to form these sounds. And the purpose of the game is whoever laughs first loses, or whoever stops first loses. So it was this very intimate game in family settings to see who could go the longest. It's almost sort of like its own version of the staring game. And this group is led by Kathy Kettler, who comes from Nunavik, which is a region in the far reaches of northern Quebec. And she grew up around family members and friends and elders who practiced this tradition and wanted to carry it on, and practiced on her own as a child, and then eventually started performing with her sister Karen. And that's where the name Nukarik comes from. It's the Inuit word for sisters. In recent years, Karen has been able to perform less and less with Kathy, as work commitments have taken her farther into the northern reaches of Canada. And so Kathy is now performing with another really wonderful throat singer, Kendra Taguna, who Kathy taught about 20 years ago, and they've been performing together for nearly a decade as Nukarik, and really keeping this wonderful tradition together. And I think audiences are just going to be captivated when they see them performing, because they stand very close together, and as they're really deep into each piece, you can't distinguish who's who and which voices belongs to which singer, and it's just that you sort of become fully immersed in it. And so I think this is going to be one of those traditions that really grabs people's attention. These are wonderful performers who are cultural ambassadors for Canada. They've gone throughout the world, as far away as India, to share this tradition with people on behalf of the Canadian government. So we're really excited to bring them to Salisbury.
I want to turn to something that might be a little more traditional, Irish traditional music. Let's hear a little bit about that from Liz Carroll. So, Blaine, tell me a little bit about the music, but also Liz Carroll.
Oh, sure, gladly. Liz is, and as that track really wonderfully illustrates, it's no exaggeration to say Liz is one of the best to ever play her instrument, the fiddle, in all of Irish music. She comes from an Irish-American family in Chicago, and both her parents, having immigrated to Chicago from Ireland and being part of that really strong community that so many people associate with Chicago, and really wonderful family scenes and family stories ground her introduction to the tradition. As a young child, at the age of 5, she was playing her beloved toy accordion, and her brother Tom stepped on it and broke it. As an aside, Tom still, to this day, serves as her manager, so he's been instrumental to her career from that very beginning of stepping on this toy accordion. Well, to console her, her father picked her up and had her start playing his accordion. And from there, her interest in playing Irish music really took off. And attending Catholic school on the south side of Chicago, she was presented with an option of either learning piano or fiddle. Now, Liz really wanted to learn piano, but unfortunately they could not get the piano into the family home. So she had to sort of reluctantly take up the fiddle, but that has worked out wonderfully as she's become one of the most celebrated players. By the age of 18, she stunned the Irish music world by winning the senior division of the All-Ireland Championships, which is really unheard of at that point for somebody that young and from America to be so honored. All the way up through 1994, I believe, when she received the National Heritage Fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts, recognizing her as one of the leading players in the tradition. And recently, in 2011, she was further honored receiving the Gradam Ceol Composer of the Year Award, another award coming from an Irish organization, and she was the first American-born composer to receive that award as well. So not only is she thought of to be at the top of her craft here, but back in Ireland as well, she is just thoroughly celebrated and held to the highest esteem as a performer. She'll be joined in Salisbury with a great up-and-coming guitarist and pianist named Jake Sharon. Jake hails from Ontario and is one of the real rising stars of sort of Celtic music broadly. He plays with a great trio out of Prince Edward Island, the East Pointers, and is involved in a number of projects. But he and Liz have been playing together for a handful of years now. It's a wonderful collaboration. They have an album coming out around the time of the festival. So we're really excited to work with Liz and bring such an accomplished performer to Salisbury and to do so with this exciting new project she's working on.
Want to turn now to a different kind of music, maybe one we might be even familiar with. It's sort of a Louisiana French kind of music. Steve Riley and his group. Let's play a little of that, and let's pick it up after that. So tell us a little bit about Steve Riley and his group. And I understand that the Louisiana French music, that it actually got some kind of renaissance in the 1960s and 70s.
Sure, of course. Steve Riley and the Mamou Playboys are as good as it gets when we're talking about the Louisiana French music traditions, and specifically with Steve, Cajun music. He's at the top of his craft as an accordionist and a fiddler. To sort of answer your question about the Renaissance in the 60s and 70s, I'll go back a couple of centuries and work my way forward, if that's all right.
Sure.
The French-speaking community, and specifically the Cajun community in Louisiana, traces its roots and descends from French-speaking Acadians who had come to Nova Scotia and Canada in the 1600s, only to be forcibly removed and uprooted by the British in the 1750s as a result of the French and Indian War. They were forced onto ships, and so they sailed south and eventually made their way to the sort of isolated and protective bayous and prairies there in southwest Louisiana. And their Cajun culture emerged out of these Acadian and French traditions, mixing with Native American, Spanish, German, French Creole communities that were there and their traditions, and eventually country and western and blues, and out of that comes the fiddle and accordion-centered music that so many people think of when they think of Cajun culture today. Now, even though that culture emerged and intermingled with so many influences there, that doesn't necessarily mean the people who practiced it and spoke the French language that was so central to the way of life in those communities were necessarily welcomed, and so there was a lot of people were looked down upon who were of Cajun heritage and spoke French as their first language in Louisiana, and so as a result of that, over subsequent generations, working your way up through the 20th century, a lot of the language skills were lost, and people weren't necessarily encouraged to keep the cultural traditions alive and the cultural identity alive. Well, in the 60s and 70s, as with so much else going on in the country with the folk revival and an appreciation for sort of multiculturalism and people and roots music and things like that, people of Cajun descent reclaimed their heritage and felt much prouder about articulating it and expressing it in public. There were efforts in public schools to encourage the passing on of French language skills and the traditions associated with the community, and coming out of that great ability to express that in public were a number of musicians who have greatly revitalized the traditions, such as Steve Riley, really at the forefront of that. And Steve learned at the feet of Dewey Balfa, who was one of the Cajun musicians who was integral to all the activity in the 60s and 70s and a growing appreciation for Cajun culture. He performed at the Newport Folk Festival to great acclaim and one of the great moments for Cajun music. And he was just a wonderful fiddler and band leader. And that, too, passed the tradition on to Steve. Steve was learning from him as a 15-year-old and carries the legacy of Dewey and all the musicians that came before him and what he does with his band. But what's so great about what they do is they don't play the music as sort of a frozen artifact or a piece from a museum. They keep forward they keep going with the spirit of the tradition, innovating within the tradition, playing with great creativity and drive. This is going to be a really lively and energetic band that's going to be performing in the dance pavilion at the festival. We'll probably have Cajun dance lessons one evening so people have a sense of how to dance to the music and make it as participatory as involved, and follow that up with some great rock and Cajun music from Steve Riley and the Mamu Playboys.
Let's finally turn to West African High Life Band, a particular fusion, I guess, of indigenous dance rhythms and melodies from Western sounds. Let's hear a little bit about that. So, Blaine, tell us a little bit about the origin of this particular music. What part of the continent does it come from? How did it grow?
Sure. So high life music first originated in Ghana in the late 19th century. And as you mentioned before we heard that wonderful track from West African High Life Band, it's a musical form that drew on a number of indigenous sounds and dance rhythms and then merged these with Western sounds and in particular instrumentation. So what you get with a high life band are multiple guitars, horns, vocals, and keys, sort of a lineup and an instrumentation that you associate with a Western band, but playing through that lineup, through that instrumentation, a number of sounds and indigenous rhythms that come out of different West African regions, and so after the music came out of Ghana in the late 19th century, it really took off, spreading to Sierra Leone and Nigeria throughout the early part of the 20th century, and it was a flourishing tradition throughout West Africa by the mid-20th century. And more than anything, this is feel-good music. This is happy music. It's music that lifts the spirit and just plays, all night long. If you were to experience it in a West African setting. And this is going to be a group that is extremely popular both in the dance pavilion and anywhere they are at the festival. And the group's band leader and the gentleman out front is the great Babakin Okulolo, who is himself sort of a feel-good, lift-your-spirits kind of person. He's just a great, warm spirit, and this comes across from their performances on stage. He hails originally from Nigeria and is one of the great bassists in the history of high life music coming out of Nigeria. He learned a number of traditional music and dance forms in his family coming out of the Urhobo ethnic group in Nigeria, but also took an early interest in high life, apprenticed under his uncle, who was a guitarist, and began playing bass with a regional high life band before deciding, if he really wanted to pursue this music, he needed to go to the capital of Lagos. And from there, his career just took off. He became a mainstay on the Nigerian music scene, was awarded top bassist 5 times, and he's eventually performing with and touring the world with such West African stars as King Sunny Ade and Fela Kuti. So his connections to master artists are really unrivaled. And then by about the mid-1980s, he decides to settle in the San Francisco Bay Area, creates a number of really great West African supergroups, the best of which is the West African High Life Band, who carries on this great West African sound. He's joined by other distinguished veterans of high life music. And in addition to what he does with the band, Babakin is really known in the Bay Area for his educational outreach work. He does lectures, conducts demonstrations and workshops on African percussion, and it's about building cultural appreciation as much as teaching musical skills. And he does this in schools, museums, and universities, just sharing his knowledge with anybody, and that warm spirit just comes across in all these settings. He's going to be a real audience favorite at the festival.
And just briefly, want to turn to dance. We have 2 of them, Jason Samuels Smith of New York, bringing tap dance, and also there's another group described as a famous scissor dance. Tell us just briefly about those 2 acts.
Sure, gladly. And since, as you referenced, these are both dance groups that we don't have audio to play, but I would encourage all of your listeners to go to the website at www.nationalfolkfestival.com, and there they can read full bios of all the artists we've announced so far, watch video clips, and listen to the audio clips we've been playing as well. But so that's a great resource to go and check out both Jason Samuel Smith and the Chakas of Peru. I'll start with Jason. Jason is really one of the great tap dancers of the current day. He comes out of the Hell's Kitchen neighborhood in Midtown Manhattan. He grew up surrounded by dance. Both of his parents were very active in the jazz and tap communities there in New York City. In fact, his dad founded the JoJo's Dance Factory, which went on to become the Broadway Dance Center, and both of his parents taught at JoJo's Dance Factory. So Jason grew up immersed in this world, going into dance classes as young as at the age of 2, and just picking up everything in the way kids absorb. And from there, he was performing on Sesame Street by the age of 9, and then in his mid-teens met up with his mentor, the great Savion Glover, and performed with him in the Tony Award-winning musical Bring Into Noise, Bring Into Funk, and impressed many of the people who came before him in the tradition. It was the amazing Gregory Hines who labeled Jason would be the next greatest, and he's very much lived up to that billing, going on to found the Los Angeles Tap Festival, and being involved in so many collaborations and projects. He's really an excellent practitioner of the tap dance tradition, and we're thrilled to have him at the National Folk Festival this year. And then the other group you mentioned, the Chakas of Peru, sort of comes from a completely different cultural tradition. And this is, again, going to be, I think, one of those traditions that wows festival audiences and really introduces them to something they've never experienced before. This tradition, Danza de las Tijeras, which translates as the scissors dance, is named for a pair of polished iron rods that the dancers hold while performing, and they provide a percussive backing to the dance. It's also accompanied by fiddle and harp. This is a tradition from the southern Andes in Peru. It's a ritual dance that is highly acrobatic and goes back, it's ancient. It goes back centuries and centuries and centuries. And it's the dancers come from a hereditary class of performers who were tasked with mediating between the human, natural, and spiritual worlds in traditional Andean communities. And what they would do is, these are all about competitions. You would have teams that consisted of a dancer, a fiddler, and a harpist, and they would compete against teams from other villages, drawing upon a large repertoire of steps that were in the tradition, but improvising for each competition, and sort of in escalating levels of difficulty in competitions that would last for about 10 hours. And it was all about representing and bringing honor to your village. This is a tradition that has been endangered many times of repression by the Catholic Church, as traditions have migrated from rural into urban areas like the capital of Lima. And in this particular group represents a really important cultural community here in the United States. In Westchester County in New York, there's a large Peruvian community, and that's where the Chancas are based. The group is led by Walter Villa, who learned the tradition from his father growing up in Lima and then relocated to Westchester, met other master dancers there, especially Luis Aguiar, and together they formed this great group that performs at a number of community events there in Westchester County, carrying on this powerful symbol of Andean culture. And just to give a sense of how old and how important this tradition is, it's been recognized by UNESCO as an expression of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity. So this is a really special opportunity for attendees of the festival to get to see the Chancas. I think in addition to the wonder of the dance steps and the tradition, what they wear, these wonderful, sort of visually stunning, carnivalesque embroidered costumes, are also just amazingly eye-catching, that are really going to stick with people at the festival.
We've been speaking with Blaine Wade. He's the program manager of the National Council for the Traditional Arts. Also with us, the local manager for the National Folk Festival, Caroline O'Hare. Appreciate both of you stopping by and chatting with us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Don.
This has been Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for watching Delmarva Today, a production of Delmarva Public Radio. Production and audio engineering by Chris Rank. Hosted by Don Rush. For podcasts, visit delmarvapublicradio.net or subscribe to the Delmarva Today podcast on iTunes. Delmarva Today can now be seen on Pack 14.